right, so we are live, and I wasn't planning on doing this at all, but here we go. Okay, let's see. Live shows. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Or you can. All right, we're done there, and allow this time. All right, sorry, I'm looking at a couple different things. Click here to start the show. Right, trying to do Podbean at the same time, might as well, get a lot of bang for your buck. You know what I mean? Like, which is what I'm always trying to do is get a lot of bang for my buck. Let's see. Now, let's see if I'm in fact live on Facebook because oh, look, I am. Look at that. How clever. All right, so we have it all working, but not everything. There are some new things, new assets in the studio that we'll be trying out to make this even a better show. You know what I mean? So, the best part of life is when you can learn about everything at the same time. And so I find that to be most comforting and easy, So if you're not on, 900 learning curves at once, then you're just not having fun at all. I mean, just not. You know what I mean? So I titled this, Don't Stop Believing. I always title things for myself, and I'm always speaking to myself, and I'm always pretty transparent, right? What a novel concept. You're supposed to be waking up and having coffee, but I've already had coffee. And I have this little focus shot, and it's working quite well. Anything for the brain, I should have an advertisement come on for it. Anything for the brain, I always do. If it's for your brain, I take it. Now, I did try that smart water, and it hasn't worked yet, but nonetheless, I gave it a whirl. I never got no smarter as a result. So, I had a couple friends suggest I do comedy, and it's like, well, we could. Um, yeah, my challenge with that is that I tend to ride the edge on things anyway, so I don't want to go over the edge or anything. And you really do have to be fairly witty and on your game and whatnot. But I might give it a whirl. But right now we've got a lot of things going. The biggest one. Okay, so on the screen you'll see. I'm going to get into my little topic. At the bottom it says you can do a donation. Basically, I'm going to put together a Kickstart campaign for Angel Agents. We're in the We've done most of the footage. There's always going to be some footage you have to do, even at the end, to kind of put some pieces together and get them to flow and whatnot. But I mean, as far as the interviews and all that, and what we've done, the bulk of that. So I'm working on editing that. And when we go into the post production part, that's the part I know the least about. I mean, I know some of the basic editing things, but it's going to have to involve other people. So that will be, um, I will have to pay them. Okay. So here's for today's topic. Ready? Um, the challenge for a lot of people that I talked to lately has been, it's this thing, it's this conversation I have with the Lord like all the time. And it's the place where the enemies really tried to get me in a lot of ways because I was just telling a good friend of mine that, um, you know, on the front end of your journey, it's the core soul wounds, right? And the traumas, early traumas in your life that have the greatest impact, right? And so you're working and processing through those in terms of inner healing, in terms of all of that, and the biggest part of that is I think Jesus wants to free us to live from the blueprint of our life, like of heaven. So I've got a blueprint, for you. We're trying to connect with the destiny, that all the days of our life were written in the book before there was one. And so we're trying to connect to things and we're trying not to be like, we don't want to be God's generals part two or three. I mean, I'm being funny, love the book. Um, my point in that is that all of their character flaws kind of derailed them. And I think because this thing is so big I remember Carol Wimber sharing this story, and I've shared it a few times. You know, the Lord asked her, where are all of my torches? And she said, I don't know, Lord. And suddenly she had about 20 people, like a Rolodex. That's how, you could tell when you, by the kind of things that are in the way you frame up the word, that Rolodex is a dated piece of machinery there, so to speak. But she saw all these guys that got knocked out of the play. They got knocked out of whatever they were doing. Some of it was, sexual stuff and they fell and things like that, but then they just kind of stayed sidelined. You know what I mean? They maybe worked through the process of whatever that was, but they never got back on the horse, so to speak. And then others were just sidelined for other reasons. I mean, just people that were just knocked out of the game. The enemy just took them out. And so then he told her, he said, he was like correcting her theology. He said, you've had a part of this thing wrong. And I don't want to jump into what that means or what that looks like, but he said, my grace and mercy have always been enough. Now, if I had to guess what he was trying to say to her about that, it would simply be, I'm not advocating that somebody who's done harmful things to whatever be around children. I'm not talking about the kinds of things that take people out of commission that if undealt with, puts them in a place where they would either do more damage, or if the unhealed stuff began to, manifest in some sort of way, it would be dangerous to them and others. And I'll talk about those people. I'm talking about people that just got sidelined and kicked out, a lot of them for whatever. If you've ever been persecuted by the church, that's a new concept. I'll give you an example. Well, I could. In the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of emphasis on hierarchies, on covering, and control. So if you wanted to step outside the church, let's say, and start a ministry or do something, you had to have all of your, that's when you had the shepherding movement. Okay. So there was this movement, and even I grew up in the vineyard and I loved the vineyard. It was like, it's where all the things in my heart first got articulated. Like John Wimber spoke a language that my heart really got a hold of. But if you had insecure leaders, you had spiritual abuse. That most people who are believers have been in some sort of dysfunctional, you know, Christian-based something, church, whatever. You've been involved in with the body of Christ in places where it got really dysfunctional and crazy, and people get hurt. That's what church splits do, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not uncommon for people today, because of the unhealed wounds and many of the people, the leaders along the way, that have really hurt other people because they were insecure, right? A true father mantle and mother mantle is not afraid of your gift. If you're a father or a mother and you carry that mantle of a father or a mother, and you're involved in leadership in some capacity in the church, outside the church, etc., then you welcome everybody's gift. You welcome people that are better than you, and you're not afraid of them. You recognize what God is doing, and you put your hand to it, and you bless it, and you push it forward, and you're not afraid. However, if you're insecure, you've got a little orphan going on in there, or a little abandoned kid in there somewhere, then you're threatened by a lot of things. And so we've all been through that. I mean, I don't know a believer that hasn't been wrecked and hurt more oftentimes in the church than not. In other words, the church part made it complicated. The believer part, walking with Jesus, wasn't the problem. It was what Christians had to say about how messed up your life was. My wife and I, we did the perfect storm at one point in our life, and people did not know what to do with us, because people that love Jesus weren't supposed to have all those things, all those traumas and things happening. Right. I mean, literally, pastors wouldn't know what to do. They don't know what to say. Like when everything goes to hell in a handbasket and everything in your life blows up, it's not supposed to happen that way. It was like, some sort of weird Job story, and whatnot. But my point in all that is just to say that there's a lot of different ways to be wounded by leadership, and I'm not saying that every church is like that. I pray, and I have to make this distinction because a good friend of mine helped me out with this. Ecclesia, the larger body of Christ, is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the church as a living organism that is part of who we are. We're part of something greater. I'm talking about basically um, what happens in the context of hierarchy and dysfunctional things that happen within churches. There's been so much of that that it's not a big stretch for us to think about what that looks like. And so, at any rate, so having gone through a lot of those things, I forgot why I was telling you that, but it was like, um, oh, I know why. Because so when you get to this place, right, and you've already been through a lot of things, and you've kind of processed through. We're always processing. I love Steve Peace Harmon, what he says. He says, look, ultimately, we're never free, not completely free, meaning your journey is a process. He says, kind of the writer of the shack, he says that life is like this little spiral, and the further down the spiral you go, the deeper it goes, right? And so you're not the same person today that you were yesterday or tomorrow or a week from now or a year from now. And so in the kingdom, we go glory to glory. In the world system, we go to square one and back to square one and then back to square one and we start over, right? You're still the same rotten failure that you were before. You just have to start over. And then religion says you got to qualify every 5 minutes. You know what I mean? I've got to get it right if I get it right. There are two places that I have found that are challenging when things are really, really hard. And neither one is productive. One is to look inwardly and say, what's wrong with me? Which I have found myself doing a lot. What's wrong with, when you find yourself saying things like, Lord, I don't feel loved in this. Is there something wrong with me that you can't love me better in this or whatever? Then you're kind of revealing your heart. The other is to look to God and blame it on him. So what happens when we don't lay it at God's, feet, right? At him, we're going to blame you and be offended with you, and we don't look inward. Then we have to just look at the thing that we're facing and say, okay, how do you want me to see this? Where is my perspective need to be changed? What is it that you want to do? And, and also being honest about the fact that it's very painful. And this conversation that I was having with this friend before I got on here was, I said, you know what, the stuff that I'm dealing with right now, the things that I would say are the most present in my heart, they're not about childhood wounds. I'm not really dealing with the orphan in the same way. I mean, yes, if you listen to some of the things that come out of my mouth, but what I'm saying is the enemy can always tempt us into something that's familiar, okay? He goes for the thing that's familiar. But it might be something that's dead, done, and dealt with, but he still wants to bring it up and say, see, you are still the orphan, blah, 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 blah. The stuff that I'm talking about is stuff that I think you guys can relate to. And that's this. It's the stuff that's happened in the last couple of years. Like a lot of people have been through a lot of trauma and a lot of things have gone badly, a lot of bad outcomes. And a lot of people, believers, it's kind of like Peter, where am I going? Right? There's nowhere to go. You are the Christ. You are the one. It's like we have in us, we do actually have steel in our spine and flint in our forehead. And we know we're not going anywhere. Like David, whom do I have in heaven but you? Where am I going? Right? And also like David, it was all a mystery to me until I stepped into the sanctuary. And then I realized their end, right? So we're trying to figure out what to do with what seems evil in places and unjust in places. And so when we're trying to do that, and we're wrestling, if we're not going to lay it at God's feet because he is always good and he is always working things together for good. And if we can't, and we don't go inward with it and try to annihilate ourselves and figure out what it is that's so bad and horrible about us that God can't do something for us, it does bring us to a place where we have to say, okay, what are you saying about this, Lord? Like, it's where we need to actually hear more, be connected to each other more, I can't tell you how much my conversations with other brothers and sisters makes a huge difference, because anything in isolation is much, much worse. Okay. And so the enemy does want to isolate, divide, and conquer. Okay. And so for me, using my voice is always the way that things shape and form for me. I say things out loud for the first time. I'm a verbal processor, et cetera, et cetera. And so if I'm not on here, it means that I'm probably not, either I might not be doing great, or I'm overwhelmed, or I'm too busy, or there's so much going on. But generally speaking, if I cut this part off and I cease to do this, I die. And I mean that metaphorically. Okay. So, um, so here we are, we're wrestling in the middle with some things, right? Because we've crossed this threshold, right? That was what was, it was so disillusioning for me. It wasn't like in previous times I didn't know that coming into a new area meant that you were going to confront some of the devils in that area. In other words, there was going to be resistance, okay? There were going to be things that happened. I've talked about it as like you cross the line, you come across a threshold, and then the devil sucker punches you before you go, during the time you're going, while you're going across the threshold. After you're across the threshold, he's still sucker punching. He doesn't let up his barrage. If there's anything that I'm hearing and experiencing that sounds, that I could put my finger on and say that's something that's an enemy strategy right now, because it's happening to a lot of people, it's that one thing. We feel like the barrage has not stopped. Like we find ourselves saying, I need a break. Can you cut me a break? Can we just have a little financial freedom for a little while? And then there's things like if you've crossed that threshold and you know that you're in a season of great convergence where, you're moving into doing the thing that you were created for. So let's say in the kingdom, I feel like I've only been 20% actualized in the thing in terms of what's in me and what I've actually done. Okay. And so that series on David is so good. Oh my gosh. And I just saw the first couple things of The Chosen season 5, blew my head off. I cried all the way through it. My head's still here though. But anyway, that was a side note. That's what I do. I do constant comment. My wife says, yes. And as a high school teacher, they loved it. I gave them points. If they caught every sarcastic side comment that I made, it was like extra credit. And I said, you get 10 points for this, and I could check for understanding by looking in your eyes. And I'm like, I didn't tell them it was my IQ test. It really wasn't. I wasn't being judgmental. I was just being fun. So at any rate, here we are. We're in this place where we don't feel like we've ever been fully actualized. And we're in a spot that seems like it's a quagmire of sorts, because it just seems like it's not what it's supposed to be. I got so disillusioned coming here because I thought if we prayed into this threshold crossing for 5 years, surely, Lord, when we got there, it would be a bit easier. Now, part of that is natural, okay? You're in different seasons of your life, and there's a time and season for everything. And, this is a season where we should be expecting to have great favor. We should be expecting to um, have grace abounding. We should be living in the era of the captives coming back from Zion who are drunk with awe, shock, and wonder. And yet we feel like there hasn't been much awe, shock, and wonder. And then we get like, okay, Lord, what's wrong? So we get into this intense kind of um, inner looking that can be very painful. Too much introspection is not a good thing. And at the same time, here's what I think is happening. Um, if the landscape changes and Jesus is expanding what's on the inside of you so that you can work with the landscape, okay? Um, so that your palate can be expanded. In other words, you have things in you that you haven't tried out yet because you put a new circuit board inside of you that had broader capacities. You have undiscoverable territory on the inside of you that Jesus has put in you because he wants you to be able to engage in a more limitless capacity with the kingdom. Okay. And so I love the story about Jesus praying for the man twice because he sees the trees and he leads him outside the city gates and he prays for him again and tells him to look up. Because part of what that story tells me, he had to change the venue. That city was known for warfare and occult. So we changed the venue. Okay. In other words, everything inside these city walls is what you're familiar with. And so we're going to come outside of what you're familiar with, come outside the gate and come over here. And, and when we get you out of what you're familiar with, we can bring the unfamiliar into the picture and you'll get healed. And so the unfamiliar is always God's playground for us. The familiar is usually the trigger. Okay. It's the things that we're being triggered by. It's the way that the enemy wants to trap you into being overly present to the familiar triggers that are going on. So if you find yourself like me being angry all day long because you're being triggered on every front, the enemy is using that as a vortex to try to pull us in and try to disqualify what God's doing, okay? Or at least tell us that we are disqualified, that it's not going to happen. It's all a bunch of bull crap, all of that, okay? So that vortex, if there's any remnant in us of the orphan and all of that, trust me, it's been pressed to the surface in this little cauldron, the fire being turned up. But when we're in the middle, it's like, okay, Lord, how do I need to see this? Because if it's not moving, and I'm not going to push it onto God's shoulders and say it's your fault, and I'm not going to look at myself and say it must be something I'm not doing right, then there must be something to examine, and there must be something to look at, and there must be something you're trying to show me. You're trying to show me something. I think that part of trying to show me something is the part of what it means to function in the landscape that we're in. The landscape has changed radically in the spirit and in the natural. It's changed radically. And the interior landscape of our heart has to come up to speed so that we can engage with the landscape. Okay. So we're in this no man's land where we feel like nothing's really working. And it's not because he's not working. It's because he's retooling you. It's because he's reorienting you. It's because he's doing something to dial up your awareness inside of something he's trying to make the thing that's inside of you come more to the forefront. And when it does, and as it does, and you put language to it, I love I'm going to give you a quote from Fiorella. I mean, some of her quotes lately have been blowing my head off. I'm a language person, so I love language. And the value of language is language brings understanding. It's how we label what's going on. And when we put words to it, not ironic that created in his image, our words matter, and that language is important. It's the thing that separates us from every other creature, that we have this ability to articulate and to bring words to bring language to stuff in a way that brings understanding and that brings shifts in my heart, shifts in my perspective, etc. That's the role that language plays. We have to have language. We have to have a way to talk about what we think is going on so that we can language what God is doing, so that we can language it for ourselves and language it for others. Because it's that language, like I said, that brings the understanding, that also opens things up. So wherever I'm locked in to a mindset, a way of thinking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when I bring language to the picture, it changes that, okay? So if it's not going and we don't put it here and we don't put it here, then we have to say, what are you trying to give me language for right now? What are you trying to do that's different? What does this stream in the desert look like so that I can put language to the stream, okay? And so that's it. All right, so I'm going to first read this one by Fiorella, and it's this. All right, this is from a class that my wife's been doing. This is a quote. She said, the tension in between. Okay, that in between is the part I've been addressing. In between, you've crossed the threshold and you're in between the promise being fully realized, and the fact that you're already standing in the land waiting to see what God's going to do will bring you language if you are willing to sit with it for a moment, to let go of fear and truly look into what it is holding. The fear is the biggest challenge. And she nails it with this, because when we don't understand, we retreat to that which is familiar first, which usually is connected to my trauma, and which is also then connected to fear. And so it's easier for me to give a bad report, or to give you the bad picture, or to connect to something that is not good, a failed outcome, because I'm so familiar with those, okay? So it's easy to retreat into what's familiar. So she says to let go of fear and truly look into what it is holding. The language will give way to understanding. There is a fine line between, I'm going to speak some English now. Yay. There is a fine line. I need to take my medicine. There is a fine line between being overwhelmed by it and allowing its provocation to yield the stepping stones of transition. Right. Because you can go one of a couple ways. You can sit with this for a moment and you can be overwhelmed, or you can allow the provocation that you feel in your heart to yield the stepping stones of transition. The transition that you need is already in your heart, and he's trying to manifest it in you, okay? It's already here. Everything you have need of is always inside. If the totality of the kingdom is in me, it's always there, okay? So when we ascend, where are we going? If heaven's inside of me, right? All right, anyway, to yield the stepping stones of transition, the shifting terrain, though it feels, I love this part, unstable, is serving a purpose. That's what I mean when I say come back and evaluate the moment. If I'm in this spot in the moment and I can't put it on God, I can't put it on me, I have to sit with something in the middle. When I can do that, I can hear and perceive what God is saying to me, and it means something to me that this time is not unproductive. It's just not just a bunch of, because where the enemy tempts me is to go back into, this is the same old crap I've done before. I hate this, blah, 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 blah. And it's the same, blah, 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 blah. It's just more delay. Let's just tack it on to all my other hopelessness and all my other grief, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where the enemy wants to go with it. So this pause in the middle is actually pretty good. She says, the shifting terrain, though it feels unstable, is serving a purpose. It is moving you, not shaking you. Recognize the difference. There is one's rooted in fear and one is rooted in anticipation. The greater, okay, the truth is, that wasn't tongues, that was me just going, all right, so if I stop interrupting myself on this, I'd probably do better. I'm going to read it just straight right now. Okay. The shifting terrain, though it feels unstable, is serving a purpose. It's moving you, not shaking you. Recognize the difference. The truth of the matter is that what is in you is greater than the tension. And it's greater than the shift you are in. Put that in your pipe and smoke it for a couple hours. Sitting with it is learning to govern it. And distilling its pattern is reigning in it. Your authority must emerge in the midst of disruption. All right, the shift is not a change. It is God teaching you to govern the forces of change and to move with him. Wow, wow, wow. And then There's this word from Almac that my wife sent so timely. I was actually talking to somebody else about Almac, and then she sends this word. Boom. Tell you what, she's the most spiritual person I know. All right, perspective. Keep your eyes on the prize, not on the process, not on the obstacles, not on the feelings, not on the accusations. Keep your eyes on the prize. Just because it's taking time doesn't mean it's not happening. That's one of those ones that I need to rehearse that one beginning of the day, midday, later day, before I go to sleep. Sometimes I have to tell my heart the truth so that it can follow. If I only go with the emotion in my heart, I'll drown every time. And it's not that we tell our emotions to shut up. I have a friend in Brunswick who would be like, go crazy if I said that. You don't tell them to shut up. Oh, you know. Yeah, she called me in the middle of a broadcast one time. Said, no, you can't just tell your emotions to stop it. Oh, okay. She was right. But anyway, blast from the past. The hard part is hanging in there, and just because it's taking time doesn't mean it's not happening. The feelings, they come and go. Most of them are awful, right? And so sometimes I have to tell my heart the truth so that my heart can make a shift and it can begin to hear something and believe something that's true. And hearing my thoughts will motivate my emotion. Your emotion comes from what you're thinking. When you think you see something really horrible, your emotion goes, right? When you think you hear something, so it originates in your brain, a lot of it, whether you recognize it or not. And a lot of it is driven from that place. So my thoughts are provoking emotions, whether we think they are or not. They do. They're not static, they're dynamic. And so then there's one more. Now, this is a guy, okay, I interviewed Kathy Walters for Angel Agents and some of the best, stuff, some of the good stuff. All of it's good stuff. And she's connected to people around the world. She does more from her seat and with her cell phone than a lot of people do in the course of a day. I love it. But she said, there's a guy named Milos, a friend who's over, and I'm highlighting his word. I can post it later, and you guys can just, have it. But something he said, it's interesting. In these times, it's like the one of the graces the Lord is giving is bringing people around that you can actually, that are saying something to you, that are helping shift that perspective. So like I said, when we're in the middle, the question we have to always ask ourselves is, how do you want me to see this differently? And what is it in my own perception that is the problem with me seeing what you're doing? Because usually it's that there's something familiar wrapping itself around me like a cocoon, right? Because we retreat into the familiar. It's the first thing that comes up in the hard drive, right? All those trauma responses come right up out of the hard drive of our heart. And so we've been trained, and we can be untrained to have an expectancy of something good, like the ones coming back from Zion who were drunk with awe and wonder. And so we're trying to actually retrain our interior landscape to not go for the familiar trigger, but to step into the unfamiliar thing that God is doing and say, I want to be there, and help me stay there. Because if I stay there, I'm going to be connected to what you're doing in the moment. And I'm not going to just walk through life a freaking zombie who's having the crap beat out of them, rather than be someone who's actually seeing and perceiving the change and the blueprint of heaven that you're trying to release. So he said this, I love this. He said, I hear God saying to someone. Now, when you hear those, that there's a lot of someones, right? So you can go nuts on just, Randy Clark used to say it this way: once you have something happening in a meeting for healing, then it's everybody's, right? It's a do it again, Lord. God's not a respecter of persons. So there's not just one someone, okay? It's any someone whosoever will be a someone could take the word, okay? He says, hold your ground. Even in the dry wilderness, you will bear fruit. Proclaim this word. And I thought this was, how was that again? I will not die. I will not sink. I will not give up or fall away, but I will live and my house will live. I will grow and develop and expand, and even in the dry land, I will bear fruit. For I am not rooted in circumstances, but my root is deep in Christ Jesus. Justin Abraham would say it, all is well. All is well. And all is going to be well. I think I haven't been tested as much on this thing of telling my heart what my heart needs to hear. And, sometimes, it's not that all of our pouring out our heart is something wrong with that. I pour it out to God. He already knows. But I love what they said in the shack when the main character asked God, Papa, and Holy Spirit, basically, so if you already know everything that's in my head, then why do I tell it to you? And she said, because of course, this is not a theological statement. It's just a statement about the heart and about our relationship with God. She says, we do, but we empty ourselves of all of that. And we try to listen to you as if you were saying it for the first time. And I thought, of course, God's not bored with my complaint. My friends might get a little bit bored with my complaint. But honestly, here's the difference, okay? If you're pouring your heart out with your friends or a friend or your spouse or whoever, and that leads you to another place. I have a couple friends that's kind of like that. It's like you pour it out and suddenly we're praying and we're declaring and that's where it's supposed to go. But if you're a verbal processor at all, you don't get there by not saying anything. You have to start with what's the foremost in your heart, which is usually the stuff that's garbage, right? I have to be able to say this part, in me that is there, and it's part of, it's kind of like I got to go through the crap, and then if I get to the other side, the problem is if you stay stuck there. And so I always say that if the emotion you're experiencing is larger than what the situation calls for, it usually is a trigger and it has history. Okay. That's what lets you know that. Okay. So there's something there. Right. And so that's not a bad thing. The thing that needs to happen in that is we have to process past that. So in other words, I don't sit with it and just let it become anything we do in isolation and darkness, it just grows. Okay. And then we think I'm the only one on the planet that's dealing with this. Well, I've been finding out that everybody's dealing with this. Okay. So we process through that part. Here's what it means for us to be, if we're more seasoned. We've been around the mountain a few times, right? We know something of God's ways and how he functions. And yet he's always pouring out a stream in the desert. He is perpetually doing something new that we need to perceive. And that's where revelation replaces religion 100%, okay? Because we're trying to get a hold of something. Do you not perceive it? Well, if we don't pause for a moment, we don't perceive anything oftentimes. And for many of us, I know for me, I have to begin to perceive it. I have to articulate it somewhere, and then it begins to unfold. Language is what helps us understand. Language helps us to get a hold of what we're perceiving. When we put words to what we perceive, it becomes a reality to us. It becomes something much more tangible. So there's this whole process. Everybody processes differently. I'm verbal, so my friends get to hear me say it. And I'm sure they're all rejoicing, like, oh God, there he goes again. Shandalaba, whatever, right? Yes, showed him up. No, but I'm also around people that are like that as well. And so I think we all are to a degree. It's one of the things about language, whether we're writing it down in a journal, whatever that looks like for us. But my point is sometimes to get to the thing you're perceiving, you have to wade through the waters of your heart that seem the most polluted. And on the other side of that, once you get that part out and you're actually saying things, that you're feeling, number one, you're articulating what's in here. You're articulating usually what the barrier is, okay? Whatever we're articulating at that time is usually the thing that is where we're stuck, okay? So I get unstuck as I say the things that are there. And if we have any kind of seasoning in this thing where we've been doing this for a while, then we don't stop there. We don't just stay there. That's the difference. It's one thing to feel like a victim in a moment or a few moments, or to feel like a victim every day this week. It's another thing if you stay there. So, in that, part of what God has formed in us, Paul said, I labor in my children until Christ is formed in you. Part of what he has formed in us through many years of cultivating intimacy with him and digging deep wells when everything seemed like it was dry as it can be around us. Part of what he has cultivated is a secret place inside of us that is it's there. It's kind of like if you could imagine a cavern with diamonds and rubies and precious stones embedded into the very walls of the cavern. And if you've ever been out in one of those states where they have caves and you go in the cave and they say, now watch this, and we're going to turn out the lights. Okay. Now put your hand in front of your face. You don't see it. I don't see it. Right. Okay. That's their point. But think about the things, because nothing in your journey is wasted. Okay. Nothing. I don't care how crappy it is. It doesn't get wasted. It's all part of something. Think Joseph. Okay. No part of his journey was wasted. He may not understood it in the middle. In retrospect, we often understand a lot more, right? So think about that cavern with all of those stones and the light that they hold. This is what that man at the pool of Bethesda had somewhere in him. I mean, any believer who has, it says a smoldering wick you don't snuff out, a bruised reed you won't break. The man at the pool of Bethesda, if you remember right, he never said, yes, I want to get healed. Jesus asked him if he wanted to. He never said yes, but he saw something in the cavern of his heart that was still illuminated. Boop, a little bit. And he said, get up. So turning the lights out, all of those embers and jewels and those precious stones in the cavern would still provide light for you to see. That's what our history and being further down that spiral in our walk with Jesus does. It creates a cavern full of precious stones that when the lights are out, we still have light. And that thing in that passage in Mark 8, it says he led him, I think it's in the Message version this way, as his sighted guide. When we're in the cavern with the lights out and we're literally living by the light that has been forged inside of us in the very cavern of our heart and those precious stones, as my analogy, and we're living in that place, it's like that. I'm being led as a sighted guide by the hand. God doesn't leave me. I still see. I might see dimly, but I'm being led through, right? Then when he gets out of there, what does Jesus say to him? Look up. And suddenly he saw it all. I see, I can see everything clearly now. I pulled you out of what was familiar, this warfare, this city of chaos and turmoil and occult. I brought you outside the gate into the unfamiliar realm. And in the unfamiliar realm, you saw things clearly. That's exactly what we're asking Jesus to do. Bring me out of what I know into what I don't know. Give me the perception and the ability to see and perceive it and put language to it so that I can be set free. and step into the thing you're doing and be able to navigate this landscape that is radically different. That's all we're doing. So I will leave it there. Blessings. Love the interaction. Please do. And yeah, that's good.